Alright, so what you need to do film photography at night is first off a tripod. A tripod is absolutely essential. You can't really just do it handheld, even if you're shooting at f2.8 and stuff. It's generally always way too dark to do night photography like that. So one of the things that you will need as well in order to avoid camera shake is not just a tripod, because even if you do press the button down like that, you will get camera shake. So the thing that you definitely do not need is Fuji Pro 400H, video on that coming soon. The thing that you do need is a shutter release cable. Now, if anyone can tell me how the hell that these buttons don't fall off, I'd greatly appreciate it, because I have two and both of the buttons have fallen off. But basically what a shutter release cable does is it pops that into the camera and holds it for you instead of you pressing your finger down. It kind of screws in like that. So that's essential in my eyes. Now, when shooting night photography, most people will think, oh well, I'll just shoot at like f2.8 or like a wide open aperture. But what I generally do if I shoot night photography and there's no motion in the scene is I try and shoot at f8 or f11, just because that's gonna create the most sharp image as possible for me. But that also then involves a longer exposure, and a longer exposure on film means that the more that your film is exposed to light, the less sensitive it becomes. So that's something then that's called reciprocity failure, and you need to calculate reciprocity failure with pretty much every film. And I generally shoot with Kodak Portrait at night because it just works, but you might want a tungsten balanced film for yellowy light, like Cinestill, for example. But anyway, Kodak has a great reciprocity chart that you can find online, but that kind of confuses the hell out of me. So I have on my phone a special reciprocity app. So basically what it does is you put your film in like that, Kodak Portrait 400, and then you put in the amount of seconds that you've metered for, and then it basically adds some seconds on top. So for example, I put in an 8-second exposure and then it made it 15 seconds, just to give you that extra bit of light in order for your film to actually properly expose. Other things, you will need a meter. I use a combination of a spot meter and a phone app, because a spot meter at night, this one in particular, doesn't work too great. It doesn't always pick up everything because it's dark. An incident meter might be a bit better, I don't know, but you will definitely need a meter. When I'm shooting, I'll show you what I'm kind of metering for, but generally what you want to meter for is your shadows. So the darkest part on the image that you want to be visible, you have to kind of match that against like a medium grey, so like a perfectly exposed part of your image, and generally just give the film as much light as physically possible. If you are doing portrait photography at night, you can shoot at f2.8 and stuff, because then you'll get that night's depth of field, and plus there's motion, so your subject will have to remain really, really still unless you're shooting at f2.8. But then, yeah. So I think that's all I have to say. On with the video. So I'm just going to quickly talk about those two photos, and then I'll get back to the video, and then I'll kind of do the same thing again just so you can get a bit of an idea. So this first one here is kind of a classic example of if you try and do it at f2.8 or like a kind of super wide open aperture. Now you may like this type of thing, but personally I don't. I prefer to shoot at like f8 and above, but this is an example of what happens if you do that. So as you can see, it just seems very, very soft, especially in times like blue hour. It's a lot easier to achieve, you know, actually get a sky by opening your aperture wide up and not having to wait very long. So you may want to do it sometimes, but I just recommend increasing the time as opposed to the aperture, because then you get a sharper photo. But yeah, this is just kind of an example of what happens if you do that. Just very quickly, in terms of metering for this photo, I would have metered off of the fence here, just the fence there. Now this is kind of a good example of what happens if you meter for kind of more of a bright part of your image. So if you point your meter towards, for example, this part, so yeah, or the windows itself, maybe this window, this is what happens if you just put that into your camera. So I would have probably maybe metered for this white area here, or along the top of the house there, in order to brighten the image up, or maybe even this part of the wall here. Not happy with this photo, but that's what happens if you try and meter for a brighter part of your image when it's so contrasty. This is kind of a more wide, larger shot, but the place I would have metered is here really, and then here. I didn't really care about the footpath being, you'd be able to see the footpath here, so it's fine for that to be in shadow. And the side of the building wasn't much different to there. I did take a reading off of it just to make sure. But yeah, it's kind of evaluating the dark and light parts of your image, taking readings for them to see how far off they are. And then, yeah, making your decision on what you want your medium grey or your perfectly exposed part of the image to be. So, for example, the side of this, I could kind of see that a lot of light was coming in. So I didn't worry about kind of meting for this. What I cared about was this part in the middle here. Very similar thing in this photo as well. It's just I meted for this part, and then maybe into the bricks a little, and then didn't really care about this part. Maybe if I did it again, I might expose for more over here, just so these bricks are a bit brighter because they are just muddy, but you can still see them, so that's kind of annoying. But yeah, I expected the light from this to bleed through a lot more than it did. But yeah. Generally shooting everything at like f8 and 15 seconds because it just be that way. Now, I'm not really that happy with this photo really. It was kind of a recreation of something I did at daytime, but something that you can do with your photos, especially at nighttime, is use lights and use people if you have someone and you want to make your photo more interesting. In this case, I don't really like the fact that there's someone just stood there in the bus stop. It kind of looks a bit weird and off, but I could have just kept the light in the bus stop. For example, I did it with a telephone box once, and that kind of worked cool. But yeah, just if your photos maybe looking a little bit boring and you want to excite it a bit more, just think about stuff that you can throw in there yourself to make it a bit more interesting. But in terms of metering for this, it would have been off of here and off of here, and then maybe the grass, and maybe just double checking what the houses were doing as well. And then for this photo here, I would have just metered off this part and then maybe this part here, and then double checked with the pavement and the ground there. But yeah, ultimately this is kind of my perfectly exposed part of the image. But as you can see, the tops of the houses kind of disappear a bit, but I kind of didn't really care that much about that, and you can't really see the tiles of them. But yeah, I wanted it to kind of disappear into the sky a little bit anyway. technically 3 stops overexposed, but I think it's exposing for the actual door over there as opposed to around it, so it should be absolutely fine. Because if you're exposing for something that's super bright, like a door for example, then that's all that's going to be exposed for. You're not going to be able to see your shadows, so like the stuff around that over there. This photo is kind of an example of like a contrasty scene and how it can go wrong when you kind of expect things that don't really happen. So I kind of expected the bleed through of these lights to shine on the car a bit more in order to exaggerate its shape, but it didn't. I probably should have either opened my aperture up more or just basically had more time for this exposure, but I definitely wanted the car to be silhouetted and I didn't want any chance of like a spill, too much spill on that car. I wanted it to be kind of dark as possible, but you can still make out the features, but it kind of just becomes a bit muddy in this photo really. And yeah, yep, so as I said in the video, basically I would have metered through this kind of area around here, so the car, the floor, and just to the side. I think specifically here was kind of a focus point as well. I didn't care too much about the rest of the image, the shadows being lost, because the focus was really drawing your attention into the center bit here. But if you wanted, for example, a bit more of the tiles on this house visible, you could maybe meter a bit down here or like kind of over here a little bit.
Heard this beat in my dream.
Now, most cameras don't have the ability to do this, which just has 2 mounts for tripod orientations for portrait and landscape, but you have to get a good tripod that does portrait orientation if you don't have this on your camera. If you want to shoot portrait, that is. One of my recommendations as well of shooting at night is shoot with a buddy, because you don't know what your streets are like at night. I generally shoot alone here because it's super quiet and safe, but generally advise is to shoot with a buddy just in case. Technically I should be doing 2 seconds, and Reciprocity says I should be doing 2 seconds as well. I'm just going to do 4 seconds just because that fence right there is way brighter than the background, so I want to make sure I'm exposing for the background and not that, but yeah. You also may have to use bulb mode on your camera as well, because your camera may not manually account for you, so that just involves holding it in and putting a timer on your phone. That Reciprocity app has an actual timer built in, but this camera has a countdown up to 15 seconds. I can't find its bulb mode for some reason, so I'm not doing anything longer than 15 seconds. But yeah, you will have to just hold the button in on this thing here until the timer is up, if you don't have that feature on your camera. yeah, it's definitely shot all the images now. In conclusion, night photography is a lot of guesswork. It's practice that mostly makes night photography, and I still haven't even got there yet. But it's mostly looking at your meter, trying your best to measure the points that aren't super bright like windows, and the points just next to it, or the darker points of the image, and using that as your exposure. But in general, it's really just trying to get as much light as possible into the scene, because if you underexpose, you can't get that back. But if you overexpose, there's a chance you could just pull the slider down, basically. And then reciprocity is very important as well. So generally anything above 2 seconds you'll need to calculate reciprocity for, and if you're shooting at f8 like I generally do, you definitely need reciprocity because it's a long exposure. And that's it really. It's just mostly getting out there, having some fun, trying it out and then trying again. But generally always keep in mind, even if your scene is super dynamic, you want as much light there as you can possibly get. Chips! Fucking chips, love chips. This was actually my favourite photo of the shoot. It's just kind of super creepy and yeah, eerie. Yeah, that was kind of my intention with the photo, but it just came out really, really nicely, the colours and yeah. So something I did for this shot is I think I lowered my aperture. Lowered or raised? Well, I made it basically, I think I made it f5.6 in this one and then like a 4-second exposure, because I specifically wanted the fence here to be blurry and out of focus, because I didn't want it to like offset the fact that the focus is indeed the house. The fence is just there to add a sense of eeriness. But yeah, depth of field is something that generally I just shoot at f8 and f11 because most of my stuff is pretty wide. But if you have something that's kind of covering frame or super close in frame, something you can do, I guess, is use depth of field in that way, although that does make most of your image more soft. But in this case, it doesn't matter that much because you've got the windows in the house. But where I would have metered is just here, and I think maybe a bit of the grass, but I kind of tried to ignore this part as much as possible because the post was so much brighter than the background. I'm not really sure what I was going for in terms of composition and stuff for this photo. Whoop. And yeah, the metering wasn't great on it. I wasn't sure if it was the last photo, so I just kind of just took it. I wasn't really caring that much. I just wanted to make sure if my camera had finished or not, because I'm still getting used to the Pentax. But yeah, I literally just metered for there and there really quickly and lazily. If I was to do this photo again, I would have thought about maybe a more interesting composition, maybe get rid of this top of the house because it is so dark that even if I did meter more for it, it wouldn't really make much difference. So I probably should have lowered the camera and looked more at this part of the photo. Did I talk about diffusion filters? I don't think I did talk about diffusion filters. So basically diffusion filters kind of make your night photography look a lot more dreamy, kind of bloom the lights and the atmosphere. It creates a lot of atmosphere. I don't have a diffusion filter. I have one on a back order from Moment, but it's not available yet. But I kind of just applied some post-processing to this photo and some of the others to make it seem a bit more dreamy. But yeah, I think that's it. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's kind of a little look at some tips and how I've gone about taking some photos at night photography. Yeah, I'm not fantastic at it, I'm not the best at it, but hopefully this video will help some people out. Yeah, feel free to subscribe. I have loads more sort of film photography content coming out on the channel. Feel free to look at some of my previous videos as well. I have night photography and all sorts of videos. And yeah, that's all I have to say. I hope to see you in the next one, and goodbye.